You are 19 years old, and it is the 5th of December, 1975, and the light is already going out of the sky. You've got 4 bags of groceries and a paycheck that's already been cashed, and a wreath you made yourself waiting at home, your first Christmas wreath, and a husband who will be home in an hour or two. You back your car into the parking spot outside the Spring Manor Apartments on Kloss Drive. Cold air, the smell of somebody's chimney somewhere. You gather the paper bags against your chest. 2 trips probably, because paper bags don't have handles. And you carry the first load up to the door of apartment 104A. The door is the last thing between you and the ordinary evening you're expecting. Dinner, the dog you're finally getting for Christmas, the move to the new place in January, the one with room for a studio and a yard. You've told your friends these last few weeks that you don't like being alone here, that you felt watched, that you saw someone at the sliding glass door once, looking in. They think you're a little jumpy. You think so too, maybe. You open the door, and here is the thing about this moment, the thing that makes it unbearable to sit inside of. Everyone watching this knows something you don't. Everyone watching knows that the groceries on that kitchen table will still be sitting there, unopened, when your aunt walks in a few hours from now. Everyone watching knows this is the last ordinary door you will ever open. You just don't know the shape of it yet. You're watching Cold Case Narrator, where cold cases get the heat they deserve. This one matters because for 46 years, a family in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, woke up every single morning without an answer. And the answer, the whole time, was living a few miles away, mowing his lawn, going on vacation, growing old. This is a case about how a killer can hide, not in the shadows, but in plain, boring, smiling sight. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. New here? Hit like and subscribe. It keeps us digging. Now, back to Lancaster County. Her name was Lindy Sue Beekler. She was born Lindy Sue Little on the 31st of January, 1956, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to Wayne Little and Eleanor Giese. Her parents separated when she was young, and she grew up moving between them, a city mother and a suburban father, the kind of childhood that teaches a kid how to be adaptable, how to be easy company. And she was easy company. Everyone said so. She was the sort of person who tried everything and stuck with almost nothing. Girl Scouts, baton twirling, boating. Not because she was flighty, but because she was curious, because the world was full of things worth a look. Her father described her, in the plainest and most heartbreaking way a father can, as a small but strong girl, with freckles and a shy, sometimes wistful smile. Strong. Hold on to that word. It would matter later. It would matter more than anyone could have predicted, because Lindy was not, by any account, a fragile person. Her father used to wrestle around with her, playing, and he said she was the only one of his kids who could actually hurt him, that she'd pop him one and mean it. There was a little vein on the side of her nose that would stand out when she got angry or upset. Her family knew that vein the way you know the small weather of the people you love. She had graduated from high school in 1973. She'd worked a string of jobs that bored her, jobs where she just made her money and went home. And then, in June of 1975, she started work at the Landis Flower and Gift Shop on Cottage Avenue. And for the first time, work wasn't just work. She did the secretarial tasks in the morning, she lifted and hauled, and then she spent the rest of the day with the flowers and the plants, and that was the part she loved. Her father, later, would say that at the time of her death she was truly blossoming, and he didn't mean it as a line. He meant it the way you mean the truest thing you know about your child. She was married. About a year earlier, in October of 1974, she'd married Philip Beekler, an art student at Millersville State College who worked part-time behind the counter at a Hertz rental office. They'd met when she came to help paint an apartment. He was up on a ladder, and he told her, apparently, that the refrigerator had defrosted because she was so warm. It was a corny line. It worked. They married. Her mother said of them, and I want you to hear this exactly. Those 2 kids, they really loved each other. Those 2 would have made it. There were 2 small objects that tell you who she was. The first, a ceramic palette she was making by hand for Philip, for his oil paints. A Christmas gift, built from a skill she'd learned in her high school ceramics club, made specifically so the man she loved could keep chasing the thing he loved. And the second, the gift coming back the other way. A dog, a puppy. The one she'd always wanted. Philip had it planned. It was part of why they were moving in January. More room for the dog, for the studio, for the life. She was 2 months from her 20th birthday. She would never open that gift, and neither would he. Let's rebuild the day, because the ordinariness of it is the whole horror of it. Friday, December 5th, 1975. Lindy works her shift at the flower shop. She's in good spirits, her coworkers will say later. There had been some deaths in the family recently, and it had been weighing on her, but she wasn't letting it drown her. Mostly she'd been talking about Christmas, about the holiday, about what she was giving people. Her manager's birthday had been the day before, and she'd baked him blueberry muffins for it. That's the kind of coworker she was. She leaves a little before 5:30 in the evening. She and a coworker, Diane, walk out to their cars parked behind the greenhouse, sit letting the engines warm in the December cold, and wave goodbye to each other. Diane will remember that wave for the rest of her life, because it was the last time she ever saw her friend. Lindy drives to the Hertz office where Philip works to pick up his paycheck, then to the Millersville branch of the bank where she cashes it, his pay and hers. Then to the grocery store, John Hare's Village Market, the one she always used. The people in the meat department will remember seeing her, somewhere around 6:30, 4 bags of groceries, $46. And then she drives home. She backs into her spot. She carries the bags up. She opens the door. The autopsy would later place her death between roughly 6 and 7:30 that evening, which means the distance between the last person who saw her alive and the moment it happened was almost nothing. A grocery run, a short drive, a door. That's the last moment she was safe, standing at her own threshold, arms full, thinking about dinner. Around 8:42 that night, Lindy's aunt and uncle, Merle Little and his wife, pull up outside the Spring Manor apartments. They've been out. They're driving home. They decide, on a whim, to stop and see their niece. The uncle waits in the car. The aunt goes up to the first-floor apartment. The door is open. She steps inside, and the ordinary world ends. A lamp is knocked over. There is blood. On the wall by the entrance, on the carpet, on the outside of the door, on the hallway floor leading away. She calls Lindy's name, and she finds her on the living room floor. It is immediately clear that the ordinary evening has ended in an act of unimaginable violence, and the perpetrator has already fled the scene. She runs, she tells her husband. The Manor Township police are called that night. I'm going to give you the facts of what was done to her, and I'm going to give them to you plainly, without dwelling, because she deserves the truth, and she does not deserve to be turned into a horror show. The attack had been relentless. While early reports varied, prosecutors would later confirm she sustained 19 distinct wounds, injuries so severe that no one could have survived them. The weapon used had come from her own kitchen, a detail that made the intrusion feel even more personal. A dish towel was wrapped around its handle, a deliberate act, someone thinking clearly enough, even in the middle of this, to keep from leaving fingerprints. Investigators determined a second knife had also been used, one the killer brought and took away, and that was never found. And she fought. This is not a flourish. It's in the record, in the wounds on her hands and arms, in the wrecked room, in the blood spread across 3 surfaces. Her father said it best. Lindy was not someone to die without a fight. The little vein on her nose was standing out when they found her. Her hands were bruised, gripped tight around something, someone. She fought her killer with everything a 19-year-old strong girl had. There was a man's bloody footprint in the kitchen, size 10, and there was further physical evidence at the scene that told investigators this was not just an intrusion, but a deeply personal and violent assault. Nothing was stolen. Her purse, her money, her jewelry, all of it still there, untouched. Whatever this was, it was not a robbery. Now the investigation begins, and this is the part where you need to understand how completely, for how long, this case refused to give anything up. Within a day, police had spoken to nearly 100 people. Within 2 months, between 250 and 300. They formed a task force. They brought in outside criminologists. The district attorney, D. Richard Ekman, called a conference to figure out, in his words, where police even were in the case. They looked first, where you always look, at the husband, Philip Beekler. But Philip had been at work. His alibi was solid. He was cleared quickly. And everything anyone said about the two of them pointed the same direction. A happy young marriage, no trouble, no violence, two kids who really loved each other. The DNA, decades later, would confirm what the people who knew them already believed. Philip Beekler did not kill his wife. They chased a car. In the days after the murder, police put out a public appeal about a dark, standard-size, American-made car that had been double-parked near the complex that evening, headlights on, sitting in the travel lane between 7 and 8:40. Someone had to have seen the driver. Someone had to know. The phones rang and rang, nothing. They chased the violent men in the area. In January of 1976, an 18-year-old named Mark Capilupo was arrested on a stack of charges for a series of violent offenses against local women. A deeply dangerous individual. Was it him? It was not. He'd been at work when Lindy was killed. That July, he was shot dead trying to escape the Lancaster County Prison. They chased a second murder. In March of 1976, a 43-year-old woman named Mary Shinzing tragically lost her life in her home in Columbia, not far away. Two women targeted in the same county just months apart. Of course, investigators looked. But a man named Kenneth Dale Arndt was charged with Shinzing's killing, and police said plainly they did not believe he was connected to Lindy's case. Every road ended in a wall, and then the case got stranger. Because on the 26th of December, 1976, almost exactly 1 year after the murder, Lindy's family went to visit her grave at Boehm's United Methodist Church in Piquia Township, and they found her headstone vandalized, sprayed with red paint, chipped and nicked, gouged with some sharp tool, hers and hers alone, out of all the graves there. And here's the detail that turns your stomach. The family had only recently placed that marker. Headstones are expensive. It had taken them the better part of a year. So, for someone to find it, to single it out, to attack it, it meant someone had been watching, waiting for it to go up. And then, weeks later, in January of 1977, a letter arrived at the Manor Township Police, marked urgent, addressed to the police chief, Donald Sheeler. 2 pages, part hand-printed, part cursive, as if written by 2 different people. One part claimed to be the killer, claimed responsibility for the grave too, and said the paint and the scratches on the marker were meant to mean something, to represent the knife. It taunted the chief. It demanded to be printed in the Friday paper. It described the writer as a well-educated man, single, good job, 5'10", and, this is the word it used about itself, beautiful. The second part was signed by a woman named Janice Crum, claiming to be the killer's friend, begging police to do as he asked, to bring a Catholic priest. Here is what the police did not know, and could not have known, in 1977. They did not know if this letter was real. They investigated. They found a woman named Janice Crum in the area, but she had nothing to do with any of it. They concluded the letter was most likely a hoax, that one person had written both halves, and they chose not to print it. Years later, the FBI's forensic linguist, James Fitzgerald, would study it and describe a killer with an explosive temperament. Someone who, after the act, would either fall apart or bury himself in work, family, or religion. And he'd suggest the letter was written to distract, to pull police off whatever lead they were chasing. And here's the last, quiet failure inside this failure. The original letter was eventually lost. Whatever it might have held, whatever a modern lab might have pulled from it, is gone. And here is the uncomfortable truth about the years that followed. The desperation shows. In 1984, the district attorney's office, then led by Michael Rank, paid $2,500 to a group in Los Angeles called the Mobius Society for 2 psychics to weigh in on the case. The psychics described a man with olive skin, dark hair, a tattoo on his arm. Investigators listened, took notes, and realized the description matched a man they had already looked at and already cleared. $2,500, and it pointed them at a dead end they'd already walked down. In 1989, they tried to test a dried spot of blood with the earliest DNA technology. The sample was too degraded, nothing. The case went cold. not cold like forgotten, cold like a wound that won't close. It became the oldest unsolved murder in the entire history of Lancaster County, a title no one wanted. Every case on this channel is weeks of digging, real records, real families. If this one is sitting with you, take 10 seconds. Hit like and subscribe. It's what keeps Cold Case Narrator going and keeps cases like this from being forgotten. Because there's still a name that needs to be said. Stay with us. Here is what nobody in 1975 or 1985 or 1985 understood. The single most important thing at that crime scene was the thing they couldn't yet use. The biological profile was recovered from the scene. In 1975, it was just an item in an evidence file. You couldn't do anything with it but package it, label it, and pray. And the detectives who handled that scene, this is the one thing that went right, the one decision that eventually broke everything open. They preserved it. They passed it down. Investigator to investigator. Decade to decade. Like a torch nobody could yet light. In 1997, the technology had finally caught up enough to pull a male DNA profile from that sample. In 2000, they entered it into CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database, and they waited for the machine to spit out a name, no match. Because the killer had no criminal record. He'd never been arrested for anything that would put his DNA in the system. He simply wasn't in the database because in the eyes of the law, he was a man who had never done anything wrong. For years, that was the end of the road. And then, in 2018, everything changed. Not because of Lindy's case, but because of another one. A school teacher named Christy Marak had been murdered in Lancaster County in 1992. Her case was cold, too. But in 2018, investigators solved it using something new. Genetic genealogy. You don't search for the killer's DNA in a criminal database. You search for his relatives' DNA in public ancestry databases, the ones millions of ordinary people upload to find cousins and build family trees. And then you work the branches until they narrow to a single person. Christy Marak's killer, a local DJ named Raymond Rowe, was caught that way. And Lindy's husband, Philip, a man who by now had spent over 40 years without an answer, saw that solve, and he wondered, could they do the same for Lindy? They went to the same firm, Parabon Nanolabs, and to the genetic genealogist who had cracked the Marak case, C.C. Moore. In September of 2019, they released a composite, a DNA-generated prediction of the killer's face at 25 and at 65, describing a fair-skinned man, hazel eyes, dark hair, no freckles, of Southern European ancestry. The public looked, tips came in, and then, again, nothing. So, Moore went to work on the family tree itself. And this is where Lindy's case became, in Moore's own words, the hardest of her entire career. Because in a normal case, you find matches close enough to be useful, cousins, second cousins, people who share a great-grandparent. In this case, the closest, genetic relatives she could find in the entire public database shared ancestors with the killer from the 16 and 1700s, 400 years back. It should have been impossible. There was no ordinary tree to build, so she built a new kind of one. She noticed that all those impossibly distant matches shared a single point of origin, a tiny village in the Calabria region of southern Italy called Gasparina, population barely 2,000. And she found that there had been a very specific migration, generations back, from Gasparina to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So instead of tracing backward through centuries, she traced forward, through immigration logs from Ellis Island, through wartime draft cards, through the membership records of Italian social clubs in Lancaster, cards that listed the birth dates of the people who'd come from that one village. She found roughly 2,300 people of Italian descent living in Lancaster County at the time of the murder. Manageable, she thought. She cut it by sex, by age, by who had roots specifically in Gasparina, and the list shrank and shrank, until she came across an old newspaper clipping with a name on it, and an address she recognized. The address was Lindy Beekler's own apartment complex. She called it a Hail Mary, She told the Lancaster County District Attorney she thought she had a lead. One name. The name is David Vincent Synopoly. And here is the gut punch, the thing that makes this case sit in your chest for days. David Synopoly had been living in the Spring Manor apartments, the same small 4-unit building. At the time, Lindy was murdered. He was a neighbor. In 1974, the year before the killing, he'd married his first wife, and the two of them lived right there, a few steps from Lindy and Philip's door. A man Lindy may well have nodded to in the hallway. A man she may have said hello to, carrying her groceries in. And in 46 years, his name had never once come up, not in a single tip, not in 300 interviews, not in any file. He had, as the district attorney put it, never been on their radar, and yet he had never been cleared because no one had ever thought to look at him. Investigators couldn't just arrest him on a genealogy hunch. That kind of DNA lead isn't admissible in court. They needed his actual DNA. So they watched him. They followed him. And on the 11th of February 2022, they followed him to the Philadelphia International Airport, where he sat drinking coffee with his wife and another couple before an early flight. When he finished, he threw the cup in the trash. They took it out of the trash. The lab found a single male's DNA on that cup. They sent it to a specialized lab in Pittsburgh cybergenetics to compare it against the original sample preserved from the crime scene for 47 years. The match statistic came back at around 10 trillion to 1. And then, to be certain, they went back to the original clothing items kept in evidence and located 2 small drops of DNA that didn't belong to her, left behind when she fought back, when she made him bleed. That blood matched too. On the morning of July 17, 2022, they arrested 68-year-old David Synopoly at his home. He went without incident. Think about what those 46 years actually contained for him. He divorced. He remarried. He raised children. He worked the same printing job for nearly 30 years. He went hunting. He posted photos of himself on vacation in Italy, wearing a hat that said Italia. Italy, the country whose small mountain village would, in the end, be the exact thread that unraveled him. He grew old, comfortable, unremarkable. Neighbors and family would describe him as a nice guy. Seemed like a nice guy. He had one mark on his record, a single conviction in 2004 for invasion of privacy, a year of probation. Beyond that, nothing. Nothing that would ever have put him in a database. Nothing that would ever have made a detective look twice. He was, on paper, the last man you'd suspect, which is precisely how he stayed free for almost half a century. On October 19, 2023, David Synopoly, now 69 years old, pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, aggravated assault, and burglary. Because the crime happened in 1975, he was sentenced under the law as it existed then, before modern sentencing. Guidelines: 25 to 50 years. At his age, the judge said plainly, that is a life sentence. He was ordered to pay just over $25,000 in costs, most of it for the DNA work that finally caught him. In the courtroom, the assistant district attorney, Christine Wilson, who had also prosecuted the Christy Marac case, the very case that opened the door to this one, placed a photograph of Lindy Sue beside the defendant, so he would have to sit next to her face. She turned to him and said, "These cases are never forgotten. Lindy Sue will never be forgotten." While the defendant was able to carry on with his life, Lindy was extinguished by him. Look at her, and the precious life you stole in 1975. He glanced at the photo. Those who were there said there was nothing in his face, no reaction, no visible grief, no visible anything. Philip Beekler, the young husband who is now an old man, who had lost his wife in the first year of their marriage and lived another lifetime without knowing why, stood and spoke to the man who did it. "You took a huge part of my life from me," he said, "and caused an extraordinary amount of pain and suffering for so many people. While others had to live their life with the terrible consequences of the murder you committed, you got to live your life out." And then he said something almost impossible, that because his God required it of him, he forgave, but that Synopoly still had to pay. The judge, David Ashworth, did not mince his words. He told Synopoly the depravity of what he'd done could not be overstated, that the harm was incomprehensible. and he made one thing unmistakably clear. This man was not standing there out of conscience. Make no mistake, the judge said. He did not suddenly develop a pang of remorse, did not come forward to give this family closure. He was there because science and stubborn, decades-long police work had dragged him there. When Synopoly was finally given the chance to speak, to explain, to say why, after 48 years, with the answer that an entire family had bled for hanging in that room, he said exactly one sentence. I would like to apologize to everyone, including my wife. That was all. No reason. No account of that December evening. No explanation for the severity of the attack, for the weapon taken from her own kitchen, or for the steps taken to cover his tracks. And here is the honest truth this script owes you. It has never been established how David Synopoly got into that apartment, or what, if anything, passed between him and Lindy before he killed her, or why he did it at all. Solved is not the same as answered. The name is known. The reason went to prison with him and has stayed there. And there's one more grief folded inside this one. Lindy's father, Wayne, died in 2000. Her mother, Eleanor, died in 2007. Neither of them lived to hear the name. They spent the rest of their lives inside the not knowing, and then they were gone, and then the answer came too late for the two people who wanted it most. So, let me give her back to you, the way she was before any of this. She was 19. She was 2 months short of 20. She was small, and she was strong. Strong enough to hurt her own father when they wrestled. Strong enough to make her killer bleed. She had freckles. She had a shy, wistful smile. She had a little vein on the side of her nose that showed when she felt something deeply. She was curious. She tried everything once. She loved the flowers at the shop more than any job she'd ever had. She baked her boss blueberry muffins for his birthday. She was making a ceramic palette by hand so the man she loved could keep painting. She was about to get the puppy she'd always wanted. She was about to move into a bigger place with a room for a studio and a yard and a life. She was afraid those last few weeks that someone was watching her, and she was right. Nobody believed her enough, and she was right. She should be 69 years old today. She should have had the dog and the studio and the flower shop she dreamed of opening. She should have grown old with Philip. Those two would have made it, her mother said, and she believed it, and everyone believed it. She should have had children, and grandchildren, and ordinary Tuesdays, and 46 more Christmases. She got 19 years, and one open door. If there's a lesson in this, and I think there is, though it costs something to say it, it's this. Lindy Beekler told the people around her that she felt watched, that she felt followed, that she didn't want to be home alone. And the world did what the world usually does with a young woman's fear. It gently, kindly decided she was being jumpy. She wasn't. So if the person in your life tells you they feel unsafe, a friend, a sister, a daughter, a stranger, don't manage their fear. Believe it. Sit with them. Ask questions. The cost of taking it seriously is a little of your time. The cost of not is on that living room floor on Kloss Drive. If this case stayed with you, and it should, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which moment landed hardest. We read everyone. Her killer thought he'd carried this to his grave. He was wrong. It took 46 years, a preserved sample, a discarded coffee cup, and one village in the Italian mountains. But no case stays cold forever. We'll see you in the next one.